Hello everyone, my name is Wayne Hollingsworth and I'm going to be preparing a couple tutorials for you guys, just going over all the new features and the wonderful plugin that 2012 provided for us called DMM. I've been chatting with Vikram Sohal, one of the chief operating officers over at DMM, and I decided to do this short series, just introduction on the plugin DMM for 2012. So I have a simple pillar here that I modeled out of a pipe geometry. Simply just going to the polygon tab menu here, and here's your pipe icon, polygon pipe. All I did was take this and basically resembled what you see here. So I had a few extrusions, and I'm not going to go into that because it's going to take up too much time. So you could simply just model this or just use a pipe or whatever you want to do. We have a background here that I have on a separate layer that I'll be using it just to when I do a render. But for right now, let's get started. So we have a DMM tab with all of these cool icons. I definitely suggest looking under the DMM help user guide, and also take a look at the DMM material help. And if you have time, go to pixellux.com and check out the forum. They have tons of additional wonderful uh, contributions and tips and tricks just to get you started and get you going in the right direction. So I won't waste any more time. I'll get started here. So I have a pillar. Um, you can either create DMM from a poly mesh with an auto cage, what you see here, where my cursor is, or you can just simply go into DMM asset and you want to create DMM object with auto cage. I'll also click on the option box just to look at the options that we have. We have a scale gap value that default set to 1, and we have a target face count with this default value set to 100. I'm going to change that in my DMM asset manager, but for right now I'll leave it set to 100, and I'll go ahead and create that. You're going to get a progress bar that pops up, and it creates a tessellated cage for you, and also everything is triangulated and it shows you your resolution. So for this example, I want to keep my polygon count as low as possible. So I'm going to hit on this the DMM asset manager icon and it's going to pop this window up here. Under your target face count, I'm going to take that down to 50. And you'll notice our progress bar will pop up again. And notice then our resolution has decreased by 50%. And that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to turn off driven tet mesh, which you see here. And if I take a look, I kind of can see where my pieces of debris are going to shatter. You can see these lines here, and that's perfect. So I'm happy with that. And if I press play, and I give this just about 120 frames, I'm going to turn off my grid, and it goes straight to the floor. So things are going well. I'm going to save this out. I'm going to call this pillar lesson 2 on my desktop, and you can save it where you like. So what's cool about DMM is all of the neat features it provides. Like there's these features called DMM passive region, glue region, and density region. These are pretty spectacular and quite helpful. So I'm going to start out by creating a passive region. Actually, I have to select my geometry first. DMM asset, add new DMM region to DMM object, DMM passive region. If I hit R on my keyboard and the scale icon comes up, I can now scale my region. Now this is going to determine how and when I want parts of my pillar to be active. So at the base here, I'm going to scale this up just a bit because we want our bottom of our pillar to be passive. I'm going to put that on another layer, call this passive region. And if I press play again, that's what we get. So obviously if I select my geometry and I hit this button here, this is going to bring up the material editor, and you notice you'll see a default material. That's not what we want, so I'm going to utilize the carbon graphite. And feel free to play with all these different materials. They have brick, they have asphalt, they have all these nice materials, and it's a large vast library to choose from. So I'm going to select my pillar again, hit the icon, and I'm just going to bring my toughness up just a bit and my stiffness, and I'm going to press play, and perfect. So it doesn't move. That's exactly what I want. So now let's go ahead and under the DMM asset, let's once again add new DMM region to DMM object, and let's create a density region. And now density regions is really going to save you time, because what if I want really big chunks up here, really big chunks down here, but in this area I just want fine chunks that still will recursively shatter, which is nice, but it's going to allow me to get a little more control and save on simulation time. So I think that's great. So I'm going to select this density region, and under the density shape at the bottom here, extra attributes, DMM density scale, take a look. It has a value set to 1. So I'm going to increase this value until I see my resolution in this area change. And I recommend going up small values, and because we're working in centimeters, this value is going to be pretty big. I'm kind of happy with that. You noticed how now we have all this extra detail here, but up here it still remains the same. So I could remove some detail again and add more if I like. So I'm going to use that for now. That's roughly 1 million, but that's fine. That's a good. That sounds a lot, but it's actually a good value. So I'm going to now create a layer. I'm going to call this. I'm just going to copy this name here. I'm just going to paste this here and replace the passive with density region. I'm going to hide that. I'm going to hide the passive. And now if I press play, nothing happens. Great. So let's create a locator. And I'm just going to put that here on the side. I'm just going to rotate this. I'm sorry, I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to turn on my passive region again. And I'm just going to make sure that this locator is right here in the middle. Because what I'm going to do is over time, I'm going to animate this locator with a passive cylinder constraint to it to cause the simulation. So I'm going to hide the density region again. I'm going to now create a DMM cylinder. So what's nice about this, it's now brought into my scene. It's a DMM object, and I'm just going to rotate that 90 degrees. In my front view, I'm going to go into wireframe mode, and I'm just going to V-snap it to the locator and scale it out just a bit in Y. I'm going to select the locator, select my cylinder. I'm going to constrain parent. I'm just going to select my cylinder, and in the DMM asset manager, I'm just going to make sure I select DMM passive. And what's nice about this is you cannot animate any active DMM objects, but you can animate or constrain passive DMM objects, and that gives us a lot of control and our art directability. So I'm happy with that. I'm now going to create another layer. I'm just going to call this collider. I'm going to save that. And one last thing I totally forgot, but let's press play just to see if, actually, let me start this animation first, and let me key translate X here, and at frame 60, I'm just going to bring it out over here just a bit. So now let's take a look and see if we get what we want. Perfect. So we have nice pieces, we have big chunks, we have little chunks. I like the distribution, but I think I want a few little more bits in there. You notice here we have nice big chunks that are still cohesive. We can always go into our material editor and we can decrease our toughness if we wanted to, if it's too tough, our stiffness, vice versa, our density. But I'll leave everything as is. And let's take a look. Let's see how we can now further develop this. So I'm going to now turn back on my density region, select it, and then in the attribute editor at the bottom here, I'm just going to add 4 more million. So that'll be a total of 5 million. And notice our resolution increased again. Excuse me. So I'll press play again. And it's great. We don't have to put anything to sleep. You don't have to create any glue objects. Simply just by manipulating our material editor and applying a glue region at the bottom here, our pillar doesn't move. So I'm kind of happy with these size shards. And let's now create a ground. So to simply create a DMM cube, scale this out a bit, scale it down to Y. I'm just going to scale in an X. It's going to translate it over a bit because I'm going to now duplicate this pillar for you guys, and then we'll be good to go. So I'm kind of just looking to see how much room I think I'll need, and I think this will be more than enough. So my side view here, I'm just going to bring that down just a bit, line it up with the ground. Perfect. Now what I'll do is create another layer. I'll call this passive ground, and I'll turn off the visibility. So now when we press play, we'll see our shards actually collide with our background. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. So once I see that this is working, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cache this out, and then I'll come back for you guys. Most important thing that I forgot to do, once again, like if I turn on my passive ground and press play, notice what happens. Our ground falls. So I was a little bit ahead of myself, but what I'll do now is in here just enable DMM passive. So this is essentially now going to give us what we want. So as you can see how fast this is, it's super fast. Granted, we aren't using that many polygons. We have a pretty low polygonal pillar here, so it's going to be super fast. But now we see accurate collisions on the ground. We have no interpenetration, and watch the recursive shattering going on here as the big chunks then start to shatter into little pieces as it hits the passive region. So that's great. These guys here were caught up with the collider, but that's fine. We're going to fix that later on in this lesson. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to cache this out and be right back. Welcome back. So I have a cache here for you guys, and if you notice under the DMM scene cache attributes, you'll see my directory where I stored my cache. By default, this is unchecked and this is blanked out. So if you just paste your directory, enable the cache, you'll be good to go. So I'm going to do a quick play blast just so I can see how this is behaving. The importance of testing things out, caching your DMM simulations, looking at your play blasts. This is how you block stuff out. It's similar to animation, but in effects, you want to block stuff out. You want to just do R&D testing and just previs look your simulations just so that you can detect any trouble areas, and then you can go into the troubleshooting department when it comes to trying to have your sim run smoothly. But for right now, for this lesson, I think we're in pretty good shape. So as you can see, we have a lot of interaction at the base here, which is nice. And I'll stop that. I'll stop that at frame 83 just to see how it's moving. And that's nice. So you can see where my locator is. There are a few shards that get tied up, but that's fine. We're going to fix that once we add on a few more pillars. So that's great. I'm happy with the density, the small bits that we're getting, the big bits, the medium bits. Things are looking pretty good. So now, another cool feature DMM provides, and that is duplicating your DMM object. I didn't go over how to texture your DMM object, and I will in just a bit. But I'm using one shader, a default Lambert 1, so this technique works great. So if I turn on my density region and my passive region, select my DMM object, and here's a feature here, duplicate selected DMM object. You can either do it through your DMM asset manager at the bottom here, but I'll use the icon, which is a lot easier. Give it a few seconds to think just a bit. And now what I can do is just simply pull this column over. You're going to get an error message, but that's fine because it's going to be nitpicking about your specific cache. So what I'll do now is select my original DMM pillar and deactivate this cache. So now what this is going to do for me now is allow me to utilize the same material that we have, the carbon graphite, or I can go in and just switch up the attributes. I can go into my density regions here and change that up a bit, but I'll leave everything identical. I will just slightly rotate this over 90 degrees just so we could have a different portion visible, and it'll just add a little bit more variety with our shattering that's facing the camera. I'm going to select my object and I'm going to create a passive region. It brought over the density region, but it did not bring over the passive region, and that's totally cool. And I'll just bring that down, scale it out a bit. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I will now assign this passive region to my passive region layer. So that's great. I'm going to hide my density regions, and let's now, our cache is disabled. Let's take a look. Everything looks normal, and now let's take a look. Let's play and see how our simulation behaves. So we have our first pillar being shattered. These shards are now traveling, and they're going to hit this pillar, and you can now see the recursive shattering that's taking place. And we can now set up a system, have it cached, and propagate that now into different scenes. So it's pretty flexible, it's fast, we're getting feedback on the fly, and everything is customizable, which is great. So I'm happy with that. I know that works, and I'm going to also cache the scene out, and when I return, what I'll do is show you guys how to set up texturing the interfaces, the outer faces, the advantages and the disadvantages of doing so. So before we wind down in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to assign shaders to your interior and exterior of your DMM object. And as you can see, our pillar is cached successfully and things are looking great. So for my final play blast, what I would like to achieve is I'd like to have 5 pillars being smashed into small pieces. Uh, but before I do so, let's quickly disable this cache. So I'm going to rewind to frame 1, disable it, and I'm also going to select my pillar here to the right, disable this so it won't simulate, and I'm going to do the same for our original DMM pillar. So I'm going to quickly bring in a pillar that I exported out earlier today, and in my outliner, let's go ahead and find it. Here we go. So I'm just going to bring that over just a bit, just line it up. We don't have to have it, with this exact distance. That's fine. So I'm going to also open up my hypershade, and I prepared a couple shaders here for you guys. I actually prepared too many. So I'll delete the inside and the outside. I have the interior and I have the exterior. So what I'm going to do is select my pillar here, assign the exterior shader to it, and that's all of my faces. And of my faces, whatever count this is, if I go into display, heads up display, polygon, it's just saying that I have 700 faces, which is pretty accurate. Actually, no, I have 440 faces. So my entire scene has 700, if I'm not mistaken. My entire scene has 18,000, but this particular column has 440 faces. So I'm going to select one face here, and I'm going to assign the interior. So essentially what's going to happen is DMM now will know when I turn this into a DMM object with an auto cage or whatever technique I decide to use, it's going to assign the interior faces with the shader that has the least amount of faces assigned by it. So if that makes any sense, one face has this blue shader, all of the other faces has this exterior shader. So that's how it knows how to differentiate between the two, which is kind of cool. To move forward, I'm going to quickly create a auto cage. In my asset manager, I'm going to take my face count to 50. And I'm also going to turn off the tet mesh. So let's enable our passive and our density region layers. And now let's add a passive region. And let's bring that down to the bottom here. And I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to assign that to the passive region layer. And let's do one more. Let's create a density region. And you can decide to move your density regions up, down. You can just kind of offset them a bit to add a little bit more variety to the way your shards are behaving. So I'm just going to copy and paste density region off of this cube here and just paste it into my density scale here. And you'll quickly notice on the fly our third DMM pillar just updated. So I added the last density region to the layer, And now quickly, if I select my C node once again, enable the enable these. Actually, I'll disable keep these guys disabled because I want to change uh, my animation on my locator. So if I have my locator selected here at frame 60, we have it stop here, and then at frame 90, we have it stop here. So I'm just going to delete frame 60 so we can get a nice smooth animation through the course of 90 frames. I may have to adjust this a bit once I add two more pillars, but I'll do that later on. But for right now, that's perfect. So if I select these pillars again, bring up the C node, enable them, and before I forget, I'm going to have to assign the existing DMM material to this guy, because right now, if I look at my material editor, it has the default. So I'm just going to assign the carbon graphite, and we should be good to go. So if I press play, let's see what happens. Once again, it's extremely crucial working with rigid body simulations to work in layers. You know, try to be organized, try to have your scene controlled as possible, so when you're at these previous stages, you won't run into any problems. You may run into problems, but save often. Try to cache frequently if you want to do play blasts, and those are the main things you just need to keep your eye on, and you'll be fine. So I'm going to stop the simulation here, and if you notice, look at this. Look at our interior materials that we assigned, and that's what's great about DMM. Having this option customizable for you, pardon me, and you're able to change things and art direct things on the fly, which is great. You could utilize bump maps, normal maps, displacement maps if you like to add extra detail to your objects. I definitely assure you, once you're going to be utilizing this in production, make sure you layer UVs out before you pre-fracture and turn your objects into DMM objects that can be simulated. So good. So that's great. I'm happy with that. Once again, like I mentioned before, if I select this guy here, and if I duplicate this DMM object with this icon here, notice what happens to our shaders. If I translate this over in X, our shaders are gone. So this is something that the DMM team, is working on in the next version. I do have a DMM license that I purchased, so I have a full version. But I'm sure in the next iteration, this will be accessible. This feature, I wouldn't say it's a bug. I just think it's something that's not accessible right now. So for right now, we're using one shaders, and that's totally fine. So I'm going to deassemble this DMM object by selecting this icon here, and I'm just going to delete this pillar since I don't need it. I do want my pillars to have a similar look, so I'm just going to take the interior, and I'm just going to take my specular color down, and I'm just going to add a similar shader that we see here. Great. And lastly, what I'll do before I do this final play blast, I'm going to select this original DMM object. I'm going to turn on the density regions and the passive regions, and I'm going to utilize the duplicate selected object feature here that we have on our shelf. So in a few seconds, it creates a copy for us. I'm just going to translate this over, just like that. I'm going to rotate this guy -90 degrees. I'm going to take this DMM density region, and I'm just going to bring it down just a bit. And everything's on the fly, which is great. Uh, I think, yes, we have tabs and attributes and things that we can customize, but I do think this is very procedural. Similar to Shattering Houdini. No, you don't. We don't have nodes that we are connecting, but we, in a way, can still procedurally customize and tweak and create uh, any simulation in DMM that we want, from cloth to a pillar like this. And I'm going to select one more pillar, and I'm going to duplicate that one last time. And that takes a couple seconds. And I'm just going to translate this guy over as well. And I'm just offsetting how they're spaced out a bit. And lastly, I'm going to rotate this guy 180 degrees. And that's perfect. We're good to go. So these guys are not going to be grounded. So I'm going to create a passive region. I'm going to scale that guy up. Bring him down a bit. He's awfully big. That's pretty cool. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to assign it to my layer so I can stay organized. And I'll create one more for this fifth pillar back here. Great. So we have our 5 pillars assembled. We created one utilizing the technique of assigning 2 different shaders, and we duplicated the others. So it's great because it shows us, DMM provides us with the flexibility of duplicating objects or just creating them from scratch, and I have no problem doing it. If I were to manually go in and created 5 pillars with 10 different shaders, that's really not that expensive and time consuming as it sounds, but I recommend doing that so that way you have all the control you can get, and things are, once again, like I mentioned before, they are directable. So let's set up a quick lighting rig so I can do a final play blast. I'm just going to create a point light. I'm going to hit 7 on my keyboard so we can see how it's lighting in our viewport. I'm going to duplicate this guy back here. And what I'll do is I'll make these guys quadratic. Let's try linear. And I'll do the same for this guy. So I'm going to give a value of 100. Actually, that's too strong. So 50 is fine. Maybe 25. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more light. Spotlight. And I'm going to make my penumbra angle pretty big. I'll look through the selected light in my outliner. And I'll take this intensity down to a value of like 0.5. So we have some lighting in our scene, which is kind of cool. And before I do a final play blast, I'm going to cache this out for you guys. So I'm going to make sure that they're all enabled. And also, lastly, when I select my DMMC node, I'm going to activate my DMM cache. But before I do so, let me just adjust my final animation, frame 90, that's where it ends. But to be safe, and I recommend doing this at all times, uh, if you want to animate certain passive DMM objects in your scene, uh, definitely disable them. So that way you can scrub through your timeline without any problems. So frame 90, our locator stops here. So I'm just going to bring this over to 100. Bring my locator to this position here, and at frame 120, I'm just going to carry it through just a bit so it's not lingering and these shards can fall. So that's great. So I'm going to select this pillar here. I'm going to make sure that's turned on, and I'll do the same for the rest. Great. So I'm going to minimize the DMM Asset Manager, and let's take a look. Let's see how our columns work out. I'm also going to save before I press play. And let me just double check that I assigned the correct shader. Okay. So they all have carbon material on them. And just to be safe, we all just need to double check the last two. The first three we know have that material, so we just need to double check the last two to make sure they have the correct material assigned. So our simulation once again is flying. We have 5 pillars, and this is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the feedback that DMM is giving me. I have 7 enabled interactive lighting enabled in my viewport, which is kind of cool. And I could have just paused the video for you guys, but I just wanted to show you DMM speed, how fast it is. Comparable to physics or bullet. It might not be as fast, but it's right up there. It's not too far off. So we see our third pillar being shattered as our collider constrained to our locator travels through. And it's great. So I'm pretty happy with the feedback. Once I see that the final pillar is being shattered, I'll pause this, I'll cache it, and present the final play blast for you guys. See what it looks like. So in the future, if you're going to demolish a pillar or a side of a building or whatever the case may be, lay your UVs out, assign your shaders with the techniques that I showed you, and you should not have any problems. Don't feel free to play with your density region settings to try to create different shapes. Play with your auto cage settings, make a few dense, make a few less dense, things of that nature, and that way things will feel a bit more natural and less CG. So I'll stop this. I'm happy with this. This is great. This is a pretty intuitive lesson, and I'm going to pause the video here and come back with the final play blast for you guys and conclude.